Welcome to the Elevate podcast. This series focuses on elevating and inspiring women and girls into or to remain in the tech sector from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm Kelly Kwarteng, founder and CEO of Houseac and host of the show. Welcome today for another episode of Elevate Women in Tech podcast series. Today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Claire Podulka. Claire is Chief of Staff at TXI, a digital product innovation firm where she serves as a trusted advisor to senior executives and ensures that operations, communications, and large-scale initiatives are all moving in the same direction. She has worked in large enterprises and startups, product companies, and consultancies. She lives in Chicago with her partner and 2 children. Thanks a lot for coming on to the show today, Claire. It's great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to delving into navigating parenthood whilst building a career in tech.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to be here today.
So let's jump straight in, and if it's okay with you to kick things off, could you give us a bit of a brief background on yourself and the role that you do today at TXI?
Yeah, my background is all over the place. I've worked as a journalist and a private detective and a textbook editor all before I moved into tech. I really got into tech through the world of education. I started with editing and then project managing textbooks, like the big old school paper textbooks that you would have. And through that, I got connected to an ed tech startup here in Chicago. I joined when they were seed stage. I was like employee number 5 or 6, depending on who walked through the door first that morning. And I helped them build the product from the ground up, doing some editing, some project management, hiring, people management, ops. Like, you know how startups are. You just wear all the hats, and I was wearing 12 or 15 hats, depending on the day. And then when it was time for me to move on from there, I'd like fully gotten into the world of tech at that point. And so I found TXI, which is a company that I'm still with today, about 7 years later. I joined first as a project manager there, an individual contributor. And it's just the kind of place where you can really be supported in growth. So I've moved through successive roles. I became the head of the project management practice, then the director of staffing, then the chief delivery officer. So it's a consultancy. I was accountable for all of our client delivery. And as of this year, I became our chief of staff. Chief of staff is a job that has like a bunch of different interpretations, but at TXI, what it means is that I'm accountable for our overall operating rhythm, as well as facilitating our leadership team. I manage internal communication strategy, and I also do the bucket of special projects, which is just anything that is not the core function of the business that needs to be handled, anything new that we want to pick up or that we want to explore or experiment with, that falls under my purview.
Perfect. And what an eclectic journey that you've been on. I like that. A private investigator to project manager to chief of staff, and yeah, what a journey. And I'm sure you've got many stories. We could just do a podcast on the stories for the different careers that you've had and the journey that you've been on, I'm sure. One of the topics that I'm really interested to dive in today, and I mentioned it in the introduction, is around navigating parenthood and building a career as a woman in the tech industry. Obviously, you're a mother of 2. I speak to a lot of women that are thinking, is it possible for me to be a mom and still have a career in tech? Or they've just gone off or in the process of going on to like maternity leave. And then it's like, how do I come back? What does that kind of look like? I'm concerned, I'm worried. Am I going to have to leave the industry? So it would be good if you would be open to sharing, when did you first become a mother on your journey? And what impact, if it did have an impact on your career, did that have to date?
Yeah, motherhood has impacted my career really significantly. I don't know anyone who is a mother and is also moving along in a career where motherhood hasn't impacted them. It's very real. I think the first way that motherhood impacted me was even when I was thinking about becoming a parent. I mentioned that I was working for a startup and then it was time for me to move on. And the reason why it was time for me to move on is that my partner and I were planning to become parents. And besides the sort of ups and downs of a startup not being very conducive to parenthood, that company did not have a maternity leave policy and would not put one down on paper, which is a little surprising because it was founded by women and the founder was a mother. But just financially for them, they didn't see how they could make it work because that's down to an individual company to figure out, right? We're based in the US and there is not like broad-based support for paid maternity leave policies here. And so they just said, oh, we'll work something out when it becomes necessary. Like if you get pregnant, we'll figure it out. But that wasn't sufficient for me. I needed something that was very solid. And so I started looking for companies that already had published supportive leave policies for parents. And it was interesting because when I came to TXI, they did have a leave policy, but it was partial pay it was 12 weeks at partial pay. I can't remember exactly what. And once I did get pregnant there, I was an individual contributor at the time, but I had sort of built a strong reputation already. And I decided I was just going to ask for more. I was like, what's the harm in asking? You know, this company is really starting to lead into DEI kinds of initiatives. And this is an inclusion issue, right? If you really care about hiring and retaining great female talent, many of those women will choose to become mothers at some point. And so we need these supportive leave policies in place. And so I made that case. I went to our CEO and said, hey, I would like to be fully paid for those 12 weeks. I recognize I'm speaking to someone in the UK where just 12 weeks fully paid is like still not even close to, I think, what you all get. But in the US, that's actually like a very strong benefit for an employer to offer. And to their credit, they agreed. They understood the argument based on inclusion and based on wanting to retain great female talent. And even more to their credit, about a year after I took my leave, there was a man at our company who was going to take paternity leave. And I think the benefit at that point was like 2 or 4 weeks for fathers. And he made the case, like, why does this need to be gendered? Don't all parents need this kind of support? And that's exactly right. I think that's a very true argument because we know that women and children benefit if they have male partners who also get equal leave. The more supportive it is for the whole family, right? And that there's actually great benefits to their careers and to the health of the family and all of that. And TXI listened to that as well. And so now our policy is 12 weeks fully paid for parents of all genders. So that was one of the big ways that I was able to sort of navigate motherhood was just literally through having a supportive leave policy in place.
Brilliant. And I think that's such an honourable thing for the company that you work for in terms of, you know, I know that TXI do a lot within the D&I space, and you're so true. It is about inclusion, and it's great that they've recognised it from not just from a mother's perspective. I completely agree that shared parental leave is so important. So it's great to hear that they've done that for the men and the women as well. From your own personal experience, and I know you kind of spoke a little bit there, but about challenges. But did you face any challenges outside of like the policy side of things when trying to navigate motherhood and a career in tech?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there are external challenges and internal challenges with navigating motherhood. The external challenges, there's the policy piece, there's the logistical juggle, right? Especially when you have two parents in the home who are both working demanding careers, or if you're talking about a single mother. That's not my personal experience, but I know from observing others, that's a huge challenge because the world is still mostly designed for this idea of a family where there are two parents and one of them, almost always the mother, right, is totally focused on the world of children and home and family and maintaining all of that. And the other one is totally focused on the world of working in an office, right, working a career. You know, if you think about the lack of universal childcare and early childhood education and not having great access to backup care, or even the fact that like schools have the summers off and all these random days off that somebody has to cover, and there's no universal support for that. And so it winds up quite often falling to mothers Like in my family, that's often what happens. And I have a partner who is very supportive and is very involved as a father. But the fact is, he doesn't have supportive policies in place to help either. So when the two of us are left with this, it falls to me often. And I think those kinds of external challenges of literally the logistics of trying to move in a world that isn't built to support two fully invested working parents who are invested in the work and parenthood. It just becomes down to the individual.
I couldn't agree with you more. Being a mum of two as well, having been in a situation where, you know, it's that kind of Sunday night calendar kind of sit down and kind of juggle who's going to do what, who's going to go where, who's picking up who from what club, what school, and everything else. It does become really challenging. And I think one of the challenges that I felt, and I don't know if we'll come on to this probably a little bit later on, but then you kind of have that whole mum guilt piece that kind of creeps in on you that makes you feel like, well, I'm not there. Or as the children get older, I had this with my daughter especially, where it's like, well, so-and-so's mum's always here to pick me up from the playground, or this person's always there. And it's kind of getting them to understand those logistics, those kind of external stereotypes, and how as children you kind of navigate things as well. And, you know, as a mum, it's okay to not be there every single day in the playground or at the whatever it might be that you might not be able to make, and then figuring out, you know, what is it that's important to you. So yeah, I can relate to those challenges that you mentioned there for sure.
Podcast, but you also have an edit, so you're going to go here, Henry's going to be downstairs. Like, we just had to juggle through the whole day. And even as I'm speaking to you, I'm like speaking very confidently about navigating motherhood and your career. And there is that voice in my head that's saying, what are you doing recording a podcast today? Your son is sick downstairs. Wouldn't a really great mom be downstairs? Why are you putting this first? And the answer is, this is okay. This is an okay choice that I am making right now. It's an okay choice for you not to be at that playground that day. Our children understand, they see the totality of our lives with them, right? It's not about that one moment. It's not about that one choice. It's, they understand that we love them. We understand that we are present, but not at every single moment, and not with completely undivided attention. And that's just real. In my better days, I believe that that's like healthy. So they grow up not believing that they're the center of the universe, and they understand that everyone is navigating complex situations. And in my worst days, there's all of that guilt that you spoke about. I totally relate.
Completely agree. And I think for me, it was harder with my daughter. So she kind of gets the mum guilt very much more easier than my son being the first child. But what I came to learn quite quickly with her as she got a bit older, and then when my son came along, was what were my non-negotiables. And that's kind of what I kind of set myself out to be. What is it that I am 100%, I'm there, I'm present, I'm representing kind of the family, me, everything else. And what were the things that, do you know what, it was okay. And then I used to feel so much better. And that mum guilt used to kind of come down because I'd already set out in my head, it was part of my, it was okay because it wasn't in the non-negotiables. So yeah, I had a couple of different things as they were growing up that I would always be there for. And yeah, that worked well for me with my own kind of well-being, mental health, you could call it, that I started to feel okay to miss out on things, and would pre-plan that in advance with the children, with the husband, with the grandparents, or whoever it was to make that all work. So yeah, completely hear you there and completely agree. It's a real world, and you know, both parents can't be there all of the time, especially when you're navigating careers and everything else. As you think back on your journey since becoming a parent, what are some of the things that you wish you had known back when maybe pre-kids, or wish your employer had provided more support with whilst you were navigating this journey?
The thing that I wish I had known, and this is not something anyone else could tell you or that anyone else could do for you, but something that I wish I had known was how hard those early days and the experience of actually being on leave what would be for me. And it's a combination of things. I think everybody shows up at different phases of parenthood differently. And it turns out I am not a great mom of babies, great mom of little kids. Love this phase. Infants, not my jam. And so that was really hard. And to be experiencing just a sort of chaotic swirl of early babyhood and early motherhood, and have no anchor of work, right? My life has been pretty structured around work and those kinds of schedules and deadlines and interactions. And I'm really good at my job. I'm very confident in my work. I get a fair amount of praise and positive feedback and that kind of external ego validation. And an infant does none of that, right? Like, I was brand new at motherhood. I was not good at it yet because I had just started, right? I was, 4 days into it or whatever. And, physically I was in a lot of pain, and you're doing the physical recovery, and you're not sleeping, and there's no structure, and there's none of that external ego validation you get from work. A baby doesn't provide that. Baby provides lots of other joyful things, but like no ego validation whatsoever. And that was really, really hard, especially with my first kid. With the second kid, I knew that was going to happen to me. I knew that had been my experience, and so I was prepared. I was like, oh, I need to call in some help. I need to call on my mom to come and help her. I need to ask some friends to come and show up and support me in that time, because it is actually very, I felt very rudderless. I felt very adrift in those early days. And I don't think anyone talks about that very much. I think the experience that's shared usually is like, oh, it's this beautiful, joyful, special time of bonding. And it is. And you have no idea what time of day it is. You don't remember the last time you showered or spoke to an adult or were alone for any more than 5 seconds. And I don't think people quite talk about how mentally and emotionally challenging it can be to go through that period. I was really excited to go back to work, actually, not because I didn't love my son, but because I missed the structure of work and what that provides, the scaffolding that provided for my life.
100%. Everything you're saying there is something I completely resonate. You can't prepare for something that you've never experienced. People can give you some hints and tips, and usually it's like you said, that having a child is this joyous occasion, and it is, don't get me wrong, like having your children, it is joyous, but becoming a mom especially for the first time, it's tough. And when you come from such a structured, maybe high-pressured, high-profile role, to then just being a mum of this baby that you don't really know what they want, you don't know why they're crying, or then you're on your own because your partner's gone back to work, and then it's just like, oh my God, I'm all alone and I just don't know what to do. And yeah, I can completely relate to those things. And I can also completely relate to the fact that we don't talk enough as mothers how challenging and hard, particularly those early days when really all the baby's going to do is eat, sleep, cry, eat, sleep, cry, and that's pretty much your life. And yeah, I'd agree. You have no idea what time of day it is. It's just a continuous loop of kind of moving forward to that point where they become a little bit more kind of self-sufficient, so to speak, where they can, go longer and things like that. It's definitely a relatable experience from my perspective as well. So thanks for sharing and being so honest and open with that. Because you're right, it is a natural thing for people to feel, and it's okay. But reaching out, getting that help, I think is also equally something people shouldn't be ashamed of. And also feeling like you're a bit lost or not enjoying that initial early part of motherhood, if that's how others have felt as well. We spoke a little bit earlier about mom guilt and kind of the whirlwind of emotions. We just spoke about it there as well, how it can be so joyous, it's so loving, and then on the other side it can be so lonely and so hard and everything else. And then you've got this whole point of, mum guilt kind of coming back in, especially when you first go back to work and you leave this child and you're like, oh my God, I've just spent all this time nurturing them and making sure they're okay. And now we spoke a bit about it earlier, but was there anything in particular that you did to cope with overcoming those challenging emotions at that time that maybe you could share for anyone listening in that might be just heading back to work after having their first child or their second child or child number 5, whatever it may be, to just offer them a bit of support and advice?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about asking for help. And for me, I mean, I mentioned calling on family and calling on friends, but honestly, therapy is huge. I mean, anyone with a mind and a heart should do therapy, in my opinion. But that was absolutely essential for me to just have a little bit of space every week that was for me and to help me adjust and go through this transition was really essential. And after I came back with my daughter, my second child, it was even more of a high pressure situation. By that point, I wasn't an individual contributor anymore. I was in a C-level role, and it was also in the depths of COVID when I had my daughter. And so when I went back, in addition to working with a therapist, I also worked with an executive coach who was specifically focused on mothers at an executive level. And she was incredibly supportive. And one of the biggest things that I took from my work with her that I want to share with as many people as I possibly can is what we started calling no hat time. So you think about wearing all the hats, right? You're wearing the hat of a mother and a partner. You're wearing the hat of a leader and a people manager and a strategist, whatever your role is, right? And you're always wearing multiple hats. Maybe you're wearing like 4 hats at once, maybe. But having no hat time where you do not have responsibilities to anyone else, where you can just take off all your hats and just be a person. And even if you can carve out like 5 minutes here or there to do that, you need that time to restore yourself. You need that time to build back up the capacity that you've been giving to everybody else. And if you're able to protect that, ever since we had this conversation, I have fiercely protected, even if it's just a 10-minute walk at the end of my day. I need something where I am just Claire the human. And that kind of helps bring me back up to level and calm some of those feelings of overwhelm that are so common for mothers.
Really like that. No hat time. I'm going to take that and use it for myself in times when you just need to have that step away moment. In terms of things that you would do for your no hat time, you mentioned there 10-minute walk. So you mentioned there no hat time and that your no hat time was like a 10-minute walk. Was there any other things that you would do or you do now when you're doing no hat time to disconnect and just be Claire?
The most important things that I've found is that I need to be away from screens. I'm on screens all day long. I work at a remote company where we live our lives via Zoom for the most part. And so I need to be away from a screen. So whether that's a walk, whether that's a trip to the coffee shop with a book, I've been keeping books of poetry on my bedside table. So I'll just go down and even if I literally only have a couple of minutes, I'll just pick it up and read one poem. Like there's always time to read a poem. I can't necessarily get into a novel or a whole series of essays, but one poem, there's always enough time for that.
Perfect. So just having that break and such great advice as well. I think it's so important to have that step away. Obviously, navigating parenthood and a career in tech is a challenge faced for women, but also for men as well. It is a challenge, parenthood for both genders. But if we look at the women in tech space, the technology industry, as we know, already has a significant gender gap, with women only accounting for roughly 26% of the workforce. And a recent study found that 50% of women in tech are leaving their jobs before the age of 35. So that retention piece, when the numbers are already so low, is a huge thing that we need to think about. And there's loads of studies and there's loads of insights, and there's a number of reasons why women are leaving in such high numbers. but obviously navigating parenthood is a contributing factor, and one of the many issues that are causing this. In your opinion, what are some of the potential solutions from an employer perspective? And if we was to think about policies that companies should be aware of, conscious of, to implement, to better support working parents, what would you say that those policies should look like?
On the policy side of things, paid parental leave, obviously, for parents of all genders, solid healthcare benefits. And I'm starting to see some companies thinking about specialized support for adoption and fertility treatments, which is an interesting area to lean into, just providing more support for people who are choosing different ways to become parents at different times in their lives. I think is really helpful. I've heard of some companies subsidizing childcare and backup care. And the backup care piece is really important because, as we know, having now gone through COVID, everyone is just much more conscious of keeping kids home when they're sick and making sure that, there's someone who can provide care for the kid when they're sick or they have been sick, and the parents both need to be working. So I think those are the policy pieces that come to mind for me. Equitable pay is so important as well, just for having women in the workplace and stay in the workplace overall. Being able to make sure that you're being paid fairly for your work, particularly as you move along in your career. We know that wage gap can widen over time. So publishing pay bands and making sure your pay is equitable within them. That's on the policy side of things. I think the other piece that I'm interested in seeing more of, and this is a result of policies to some extent, is just straight up representation. Like, if I had not seen a mother sit on our C-suite before me, I might not have felt that that was possible. But she was there, and she was a huge advocate for me and a mentor to me. She provided me with practical advice, literally helped me project manage some of my pregnancy and leave and all of that in incredibly helpful ways. But more than anything, she was there and she showed me it was possible. She had 2 children. And as I was pregnant with my first and thinking about where my career would go, I was like, oh, this is possible for me. I'm not cut off from this opportunity because I can see that you can be an executive and a mother. And having these real world examples is so important, because they always say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think having more women in leadership and more mothers specifically in leadership makes it possible for more people to then step into those roles.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's some fantastic recommendations in there that you spoke about. And obviously the US landscape to the UK is a little bit different. And I know there's listeners that we have that are kind of all around the globe. So obviously some of these points would be more relevant for the US audience. Based on some of those recommendations and thinking about the US side of things, for this next question, on a broader scale, what policy changes do you think we need to see that become more of a statewide or national level must-have for companies to really support women? Because obviously, like you mentioned, you was in a startup. It just wasn't feasible for them to be able to offer some of the policies that were there. So it was that kind of, we'll look after you, don't worry about it. But obviously as a mum, you want that security. It's a big step anyway to then get into that, and then potentially not become a mother and not have that support is huge. And then trying to find a new job or whatever it may be, or left in that situation where there's just nothing, it's a huge challenge on top of being a mother as well. So yeah, what do you think, or what would you like to see if you could wave a magic wand that would become statewide or national level policy within the US?
I really appreciate you asking this, because issues of motherhood in the workplace are so often framed as down to the individual woman or the family or individual employers. And I really believe this needs systemic solutions in order to change how mothers can show up at work. In the US, we've had federally subsidized childcare in the past. During World War II, when a lot of men went off to join the military and to fight overseas, women needed to come and work in factories. And so there was federally subsidized childcare that was provided for those women's children. And immediately after the government didn't need it anymore, government didn't need women to work because the war was over and the men had come home, they rescinded that support. So it is possible to get federally subsidized childcare, to get federally subsidized paid parental leave for all parents, not just birthing parents. These things are possible if there is political will to do so. We're an incredibly wealthy nation. We can provide this support, but there's just continued pushing that responsibility back on families, which really means back on women. Yeah. And we know that this hits women inequitably as well. Like if you are upper class or middle class, you have better access to some of the kinds of care and you have better resources available to you than if you're working class or poor. If you're a white woman, you probably have better access than if you're a woman of color. And so we know that this access is inequitable, and we know that inequity has real world results in women when they become mothers, leaving the workforce not by choice. And so putting state level and really in the US federal policies behind, yes, we would like women to have these options, that if they want to stay in the workforce, that they can because the support is there, that universal childcare and paid parental leave has to be a national policy in order to make that happen.
Couldn't agree with you more. I think it's, if we look at it from an equity piece, I think it's a key part to really kind of put that on the map. And who knows, maybe in the future, hopefully not too distant future, it's something that could be looked at, considered, debated, and hopefully brought in to see change and support females within the workplace. On that note, though, obviously, where it's not a federal kind of policy and a federal kind of law that it has to be there, I'm sure there's many women that are listening in where they are potentially the only woman or one of the very few women on their team, maybe the first woman in their company, their team to go away and have a child. And those family-friendly parent policies are just not there and they just don't exist yet for whatever reason. For those women, because I know that you've been in this situation, you've explained a little bit when you went to TXI about enhancing what they already had. What advice would you give to anyone in approaching leadership to start a dialogue around implementing potentially some of the changes of policy or reviews of current policies that exist? Because it can be quite a daunting experience to do. So, yeah, what advice would you give from obviously doing it yourself and, yeah, how they should approach it?
Yeah, I'm conflicted about this because the smart advice, right, is to say, be very data driven, right? Cite the statistics that you've named here about women leaving tech and how more diverse teams lead to better business results, right? The McKinsey study from several years ago that everyone cites in support of DEI initiatives, tie everything back to business value. And here's the metrics the company policies that are supportive of mothers or parents result in better business results. But what I want to say is to leave business value out of it entirely and make a purely emotional case, because navigating motherhood in the workplace is highly emotional. And that's true of all DEI initiatives, right? If you are stripping the humanity out of it and you're only making it about business results, that's ignoring the fact that we should care about people because they're humans, right? The best reason to make employment more accessible to mothers or disabled people or Black people or queer people or name whatever facet of humanity, it's because they're people and people deserve equitable access to opportunities. That argument is not easy to make, right? It can get you branded as like, the overly emotional woman that's just playing into that. And many people who are already in power want to hear the things that are aligned with their incentives, right? The business results. So that's the smart way to go, is to talk about those business results. But I wish you could just say, you should support better policies for mothers because mothers are people and people deserve a fair opportunity.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think, yes, the business case is probably what the founders or the senior execs are probably going to listen more
It
to,
is.
but policy and having fair and equitable companies and that ability to be fully inclusive should just be done because it's just the right thing to do. And I think the more of that sort of thought process and approach, the better the working world would be, the more inclusive teams that we will build, and therefore more innovative and inclusive products and everything else on the back end of that, which ultimately would then bring you back to reduced retention rates of employees and your workforce, and probably a better bottom line further down the line. So being able to see it from that zoomed out kind of focus. But yeah, it's hard sometimes when you're having to sit there and make decisions and everything else. So thank you for sharing that that advice. Zooming out beyond the motherhood aspect of things, what changes do you think still need to happen industry wide to promote more inclusion and growth opportunities for women in tech in general? So not just about the motherhood piece, but obviously looking for us to try and impact that 26% of women in tech.
Definitely the move toward remote work, I think, has been really positive because even if women are not mothers, they do tend to have more caregiving types of responsibilities. And I think that people in general want to be able to have a better blend and balance in their life. And so the move toward remote work, I think, is really helpful for women to be able to have the life that they want, whether or not that includes children, whether or not that includes a partner, and still have a career that they can feel really good about. I think in addition to that, there are aspects of remote work that tend to help people feel more safe. So we know that women sometimes experience harassment in the workplace, and to have physical distance sometimes and the ability to turn off a screen can be very helpful and supportive for women as they move through their careers, just to literally feel safer.
Coming back to your experience in the different companies that you've been in, and obviously I'm sure you speak to many people. I know you're part of a chief of staff network, so obviously you have a lot of people from different organisations that you're linked to. You don't have to put any names of companies on this, but what are some of the best and some of the worst workplace initiatives that you've seen and heard of to try and help promote diversity within the workplace, within tech?
The worst is anything that's purely performative, right? Like the classic example we see every June is brands just turning their logos rainbow colored and saying like, job well done. We support queer people. And July 1st comes and they turn it off again and that's it. Obviously that's just surface. That's not meaningful. And the best is the opposite of that. It's really putting your money where your mouth is. It is investing in things like building relationships with communities of historically excluded groups. At TXI, we specifically build relationships with women in tech groups. We try to build relationships with, Black engineers, or with, sort of pick your flavor of like specific niche group. But we want to build real relationships with those communities, not just show up one day and say like, oh, we just realized that we don't have any Latina people working here, so we better go and like find one real fast. That's just this false, inauthentic way of showing up, versus building deeper relationships over time so that you as an employer have a strong reputation and you truly understand what folks are interested in, what kinds of benefits they want, what kinds of working arrangements they want, really meeting people where they are in terms of like building community with people. That's essential to promoting more diversity. Is you have to like be authentic about it. And I think the other piece that we're seeing more of in the US these days is publishing salary bands. That goes a huge way to ensuring that there is equitable pay. And equitable pay tends to, I would think, correlate with like equitable treatment. It's not one-to-one by any means, but by saying, here is what we will pay you, and it'll be the same regardless of who you are if you're doing the same job. That's just so fundamental to saying we respect all people, we include all people, we treat everybody equitably, that I don't understand why everyone can't do that. I mean, I do understand why everyone can't do it. It's because they're not paying people equitably, but they should. So they should publish real meaningful salary bands, and that will go a long way to demonstrating right from that very early candidate experience that, yes, we are committed to equity within our company.
And in terms of the work, obviously we've had a lot of change over the last couple of years, probably expedited. I think in a good way, the whole remote work piece, it's becoming more common now for many companies, and many companies are comfortable with that, brought on via COVID. What changes do you foresee in the workplace over the next 12 months that are going to be kind of big changes and things that are going to make a positive change for us, moving forward?
In the next 12 months, I hope that we are done with this whole ridiculous demand for RTO. That sort of what you spoke with is like, there's so many possibilities within remote work. The idea that so many companies are making proclamations effectively that you have to be in a specific seat, in a specific room, in a specific city every single day, or that you literally have to move. I'm sorry, you need to uproot your entire family, sell your home, buy a new one, and completely change your lives. I don't care what your partner does. Like, sorry, their job is now upended as well. With no regard for what people actually need to do their jobs effectively and live their lives well, makes no sense to me. I don't think in the next 12 months we're going to see any kind of consensus around how hybrid or remote work should be done. I think that's the work of a generation, right? Because that'll always be evolving with the needs, with the technology. I think that that's a very long-term issue, but this idea of demanding a return to office, if we're still seeing that 12 months from now, I don't know what the leaders of those companies are thinking, other than like, we literally don't care about the work that's being done or our employees whatsoever.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. I think the return to office piece is just, it's a concern, and I can hear why some and kind of understand why some of these big corps that are doing it. Obviously, they've got these huge buildings and they're costing them an absolute fortune. But in the long run, I think it's just going to be an absolute, from a work culture perspective. And I think more and more employees over the next 12 months, if that is something that's mandated and demanded of a company, I think what we'll start to see is, and we already are seeing that, people making those decisions and moving on to organisations that can support that more inclusive, that work-life balance that people need. Because you're right, you don't need to be present to turn up and do a good job. You can do it from pretty much anywhere in the world, as long as you've got an internet connection and a laptop and a power supply. And I think, off you go, you can get things done. So I couldn't agree with you more. We're at the end now, so as we wrap up, if you had to leave our listeners with one key piece of advice on navigating motherhood or being a woman in tech, what would that be?
It is so important. It's been so important for me, I should say, to be in community with other women and especially other mothers. Having other people who really get it is just so validating and supportive in those tough moments. And the tough moments come more often than any of us want to admit. But having other women and mothers in my own workplace that I find time with, even if it's just a quick Slack message or a coffee once in a while, having other mothers in my group of friends who are also navigating this careful balance, all in different careers, many of them not in tech, but still you see the same kinds of themes coming up around all of the juggling and all of the logistics and the policies that are challenging and the guilt and all of those things we spoke to. having a community around you, even if it's just a couple of other people who can be supportive, and then you can give that support back to them. None of this excuses, people who aren't women or aren't parents from making the changes that are necessary. I'm not saying that women need to own all those changes, but as you're going through those challenging experiences, having other people who are in a similar situation to you is just invaluable.
I've really enjoyed conversating with you today and going over what is such an important topic, and I'm sure this episode will help so many of our viewers listening in, and everything else. So thank you for your time today, Claire. It's been wonderful having you on the show, sharing personal insights, personal thoughts around kind of things as well. And for any of our listeners that are intrigued about what they've heard today, and if they wanted to connect with you on LinkedIn and ask you any questions, would that be something that you would be comfortable with as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely look me up on LinkedIn. Probably share all that info in the show notes. I would love to connect and talk more about this.
Perfect. No worries. And thank you very much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Elevate Women in Tech. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful conversations with trailblazers in the tech industry. And also feel free to join our Slack community group if that's something where you're looking to find that community and find that tribe of likewise and women similar to yourself. So thank you for joining today.